So our agenda today is, of course, to look at time. And one thing that will kind of drive the demo and the views we're looking at is the fact that with every view you create and use for a viewer, one of the first things you need to decide is how am I going to incorporate time into a view? One option is to look for trends or patterns over a series of periods in your data. So that might be a view where you're looking at product sales for the previous 12 months. Another option is to use time to compare different periods in time with each other. For example, you're comparing current period sales this year to current period sales last year, or you're comparing year-to-date this year, year-to-date last year. I'll talk about both of those types of views while showing examples today, and along the way, hopefully I'll point out some things that you'll try out later if you're not doing so already, so that you get the most out of the time analysis features that we provide in Viewer. In particular, let me hide part of my screen here so you can see all my slides. In particular, we'll talk about some concepts about defining time ranges that will change based on the current date, so the concept of base time versus absolute time. I'll also show you how to display beginning and end date properties for the time periods in your view. Those provide you and your users with a little more precise details about what you're looking at versus, for example, what week you're looking at in your view. And I'll also show you a newer feature which is how do I include time in my captions for my calculated measure items, and how do I make those captions more dynamic so they update as time changes and as the data in my view changes. A couple more slides before we get into an actual demo. The first type of views we'll look at are what I call time range views, and that's because they use time range functionality within the application. I'll show you where you can control those settings in your views. And what a time range lets you do is for each column of data, which we call our measure items, it allows you to pick the beginning and end date for what will be in each column. And in this picture on my slide, my first column of data, it shows actual sales detail for the current period, current year. In this case, that's week 37 to week 37 of 2017. And then it also shows me a year-to-date actual sales for the current year. I also have some calculations and then another two columns of data which give me also the current week and also the year-to-date weeks, but this is for the previous year. So there's your comparison of times at different periods or data from different periods. I also have a calculation in the view, percent of total, which we'll kind of talk there in our demo about how to customize the captions for those calculations. The second type of view we'll look at is a view that lets you do time series analysis. So you're looking for trends in your data or patterns in your data across a series of time periods. Those time periods could be quarters, months, weeks, days. Excuse me. I'm looking at sales from a series of weeks in the view shown here. So down in my image, I've got a year time hierarchy and a weeks time hierarchy in my view. And these time hierarchies, when you design your views, you also determine what time hierarchies to include and where. So I have them in rows in this example. You can have them in the view filter. You can have them across the view. You can have them in multiple places. The time hierarchies that you have available to choose from are defined within the viewer application. Most people have the same type of hierarchies available, and we'll look at how to pick and choose those hierarchies as you decide what you want to accomplish in your view. So we're going to look into the actual live product at this time, and I'm going to show you probably about 6 views. Along the way, you'll pick up some information about what's new in some of our latest releases. I'll try and point that out as we go along. If something looks new to you and I forget to point that out, just bring it up at the end of our demo. And I can shift over to live product. So we're going to look at, as I said, some views that show you how to incorporate either time ranges or time hierarchies in your view. And right now we're looking at one of our newer features, which is the favorite and recently used views window. And this window lets you flag some of your favorite views, ones you use most often. It also will give you a history of the last 25 views that you've used. going to go into one of my favorites with a year-to-date % of growth by product brand view. So we glanced at this view earlier. It has the columns for the current week of the current year, year-to-date weeks, current year, and then a couple other columns for those same periods of time, but the previous year. And it also has a couple calculations. We're going to show you, or I'm going to show you, how to add one of these measure items, which maybe you refer to as data columns. I'll show you how to edit the time ranges that are built into these measure items, and I'll show you how to edit some of these captions. So to add a measure item with time ranges, we will click next to the column where we want that data to appear, do an insert, regular measure item. Pardon me, my voice is still waking up today, so pardon the coughs and the throat clearing. So I've inserted a measure item, and what you'll first see is a window that shows you all the types of data that you have available to you. I'm going to narrow this down to look at just sales and budget. Okay. When you pick a type of data at the top of the view, then the bottom of the window will populate with properties that let you pick a time range, so the period of time that you want to look at with respect to this data. We've got a section to do the from and the to, which are your start dates and your end dates. And we also have a section to show you, do I want to look at in terms of months, quarters, weeks, and so on. What you see available here and down in the time range section will depend on how your Stratum data and your view administrator set things up. Things should look pretty similar, but if you notice some differences in your data versus mine, that's why. I'm going to work with actual sales, but I'll just go over to budget for a minute to show you that time units will vary depending on the type of data you pick. So I have months and quarters for budget. I have more types of time available with actual sales amount. The bottom part of my window is defaulting to the current period, current year, in this case months of the current year. I could adjust this if I want to. I'm going to add that as is. And before I move on, I'll kind of talk a bit about the concepts of base time versus absolute time. So when you are picking something from year or the period, you'll have a list that gives you absolute time at the bottom, so your fixed time, 2011, 2017, calendar year, and then you also have a set of based items. So these are items relative to the actual periods of time. I have current year, in this case is 2016. I can go back as far as 5 years and out to the next year. And what's nice about these base time periods and why I think they're commonly used a little bit more than the absolutes is that it helps to decrease some of the maintenance that you're doing on your views. So as time passes, if I've picked a based period of time, in this case the current year, I'm not going to have to go back and open up this view and add the new year. So right now the current year is 2017. Next year when it's 2018, my view will still give me what is at that moment in time the current year. The same is true for the period. In this case we're looking at months. So we have the absolute months, January to December, and I have quite a few based months available. Current month, I'm back to 6 months ago and out to 5 months ago. I'm going to leave it set again at current month. One case where you may want to use absolutes might be when you have a very specific moment in time that you're kind of freezing your, frozen moment in time, so to speak. If you have a special sales promotion that you ran in May of 2017 and you want your column of data to always show you May of 2017, even if you're opening up that view in 2018, then you would pick some of the absolutes, in this case May, and I would go back to my year and I would have picked 2017. And I would have done the same for the ending dates. So I've added something for the current year, current month. I also want to add a data column for the previous month. I could go ahead and select my based previous month, which I do have available to me, but I'm going to show you the use of offsets to accomplish that. So an offset can take you forward or backward in time beyond what you've selected for the period. And this is helpful. Let's say you want to go back 6 months ago and you don't have a 6 months ago option here, you can use offsets to accomplish that. So you could do current month and then a -6 in your offset. I'm looking at previous months, so I'm just going back in time 1 month. Add that, and we'll exit out. So here are my 2 new columns of data for September and August, the current and the previous month. If I wanted to, let's say I've added something, I want to go back and edit it, I can right-click on any of these measure items and choose Edit. And the window that pulls up is similar to what we were just working in. At the bottom, there'll be time range properties that you can work with. The top shows you actually all of the measure items available in your view or that you have in your view already, and you can pick and choose which one you want to edit. I just want to edit August, the previous month. I'm going to change this to quarters because I want to look at the current quarter of the current year. And my defaults go to that, so I don't have to customize that here. Click OK to update that. And now my view reflects current quarter, which is Q3 of 2017. You can also edit multiple measure items at one time, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I'd like to point out that I've kind of left these captions or these labels as is, what they've defaulted to in my application. You can come in and shorten these titles or these captions if you want to just have it be sales amount, September 2017. I want to do that for this calculation, these 2 calculations, because right now they're a little generic. They're not telling me exactly what data is involved in that calculation. I'm going to look at the properties for that percent of total column and change what I see in the caption. I've got some static text. What I can do now, and this is a newer feature of Viewer, I can't remember the exact release, but we have the ability to add in information from the measure item that's involved in that calculation. In this case, it is my actual sales for the year-to-date weeks. So I'm going to bring that caption into my calculations caption. Apply that change. And now we have a little bit more meaningful information for the people who open this view. They'll know what this percent of change or this percent of total relates to. Let's do it for that one too. Properties, caption expression. There are quite a few variables that are available to you in building your caption. I typically we use the caption of the applicable measure item that's involved in this expression or this calculation, but you have other ways to customize that if you'd like to. Apply that change. Okay, so now I've got 2 columns. They're more meaningful with their captions or their labels, and I'm going to show you how these are actually dynamic. They will change based on changes I make to the impacted or to the associated measure items. Let's go back and show you how to edit multiple measure items. I'm going to update these first 2 to a different year. You'll notice as I have selected more than one option in this window that the fields below change. And what happens here is the properties that these 2 items share in common are the only ones that are enabled for me to change. So I could change them to a different measure, a different type of data, or I can change the year, which is what I'll do in this year, or in this case. Last year, update, you can see that changes. And now my view has the 2016 for the year. I'll make one more change, which is to edit everything. Here again, everything I selected, it disables properties that are not shared in common, but it does let me change the measure since all of these are currently built on sales amount data. I want to look at sales units, pick that, update, make sure it's what I wanted it to do, and exit. So now I'm looking at units throughout the view, and you'll notice my 2 captions have reflected that change as well, because these captions are tied to each of these measure items. Okay. Let me pull up another view that uses time ranges, and that is declining sales by customer rolling 10 periods. There's a few different ways you can build rolling views or rolling periods of time. This example is going to use measure items with time ranges, and I can tell that because I've got these time ranges built into my captions. You can also use time hierarchies to accomplish that in a different way, and I'll show you one of those views later in the demo. I'm showing you this because this is another case of using offsets to accomplish what I want to see in my view. I've got a rolling 10 periods, so each of these measure items, except for the first, use an offset. Let's just edit to take a look. So the first measure item is for current week, no offsets involved. The next one, I've set an offset of -1 off the current week, -2, -3, on back to -9 to accomplish my rolling periods back in time. I've also done something here to help my users identify things a little more quickly in terms of what's happening with my data over time. I have a calculation that will tell me if there are a certain number of declining periods in a row, and based on how many periods may or may not be declining, I get a visual cue here about what's happening. So I might have a case where I've got 3 declining periods in a row, and I see a red arrow pointing down. I might have a period of time or periods of time where there's 2 declining periods, so I'll get a yellow. And in other cases where there's nothing declining of concern, I just have a gray circle. Let's edit these measure items again, just to take a look at what my data might look like at a different unit of time. We're looking at weeks. Let's see what it looks like months. That'll be the next. So at the months level, my indicators kind of point out to me that things are looking a little better. So maybe from a week-to-week perspective, going back in time, things were looking, a couple of cases were had me concerned. At the month level, and I'm looking at September 2017 back to December, things overall are looking a little bit better. I don't have 3 periods of time declining. Let's edit this one more time and look at quarters. Whoops, we're already looking at sales, quarters. Okay. And now things are looking even better. I don't have declining periods to be concerned about. I'm looking at Q3 of 2017 back to Q2 of 2015. Okay. So just a recap of another way you can use offsets. Now we're going to look at one more view, or I guess we'll move on to a view with time hierarchies. So our first view that involves time hierarchies instead of time ranges. When you're looking at these views, time hierarchy views, you're going to want to put or change one of the default settings in your views. Before I get that way, I'll just kind of recap of or preview what I'm going to look at in this view. I'm going to show you time hierarchies. I'm going to show you a little bit about absolute versus based, how to add them into your views, and we'll also show you how to use a chart along with this type of view to help users as they do their trended analysis. Okay, so back to a setting that's important to think about when you're building your view. Am I going to use time ranges? Am I going to use time hierarchies? There is a time range property, and I'm looking at View Explorer, my measure items properties. There's a time range property which typically is set to yes, or is set to yes by default. And that was the case for the views that we just looked at. If I want to include time in the rows or columns of my view, so I can look at trended information or do analysis over a series of time, I'm going to have that property set to no. And that's already the case here. It's been set to no, and I have 2 time hierarchies already in the view. We'll look at those before we show you how to add those to the view. I have a time hierarchy called year quarters, and that has a year and a quarters level. This is in blue, so that tells me that's already showing up in my view itself. and I've got this filtered to show just a couple years. When you've got this year hierarchy, you can decide if you want to drill down and see all quarters for all your years. That was a drill down on header. I just clicked that heading of year. Or you can pick a particular year and just drill down on the detail of that year. So I'm seeing just the quarters for 2017. I'm going to keep it at a full, see all my years, all quarters. If you want to change that and look at weeks, I can drag that up to the top, or I can drag it over to the first position in rows. So it sort of looks the same here when I'm at the year level. This is not filtered, so I'm seeing all of my available years. And by the way, this is absolute time we're looking at, not base time. So absolute years, the 2017, 16, 15, and I can drill down to see all weeks of all years, or just drill down to look at all weeks of a particular year. We'll do that for 2017. And I'm showing you this to kind of segue into one of the points that was on a PowerPoint slide where we talked about how you can make some of your views a little more specific to the end user by showing a couple of our newer time properties related to our absolute periods of time. We're looking at weeks here. We have week 10, week 16. That may not have a lot of meaning to whoever's looking at this view. So we can add something called an attribute relationship. For your absolute periods of time, these fixed periods of time, like weeks, you can add an end date and a start date. Whoops, I don't want all of that. And the end date and the start date will tell me what date of the week is the beginning, what date is the end. Add that in. And I'm going to drag and drop to put the start date first. Okay, so now I know that week 10 is March 5th of 2017 to March 11th. I know that week 18 is April 30th to May 6th. One nice thing, we talked about adjusting our captions or our labels in our views. You can adjust the captions of these properties, these attribute relationships, which I'm going to do here because this is a little bit long text and I'd like to shorten it up. I can go into the properties window for that attribute, look at its caption expression. And this is start date. Okay. I'm going to make this my end date. Okay. These are static labels, so you can, if you want them to change, you'll have to come back in and make that update and apply that change. That gives me a little bit of a cleaner, simpler look while still giving the exact data that I want to show to my end users. Okay, let's jump into how do I get those time hierarchies into my view. So if I'm in the view and I want to edit my rows or my columns, add them to either one, I can do that there. I'm going to add it from View Explorer. You will see all of your hierarchies levels, including those related to time. I want to show you how to put in a month's time hierarchy. And you'll notice this one has about 5. We have the based type of time, which we saw when we were looking at time ranges, looking at those years and periods drop-down list. And this is where you'll make another decision about time. Do you want the view to update automatically for yourself as time passes? If that's important and that is key for you, then you would pick the based months. Or do you want to look at absolute or fixed moment in time? I'm just double-clicking here to add that. So year months and months are absolute periods of time, and you can have a combination, which we'll do. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. A combination of based and absolute. We also have something called rolling time, which we will not cover today. That's a little more in-depth topic, which will be saved for another class or another communication. So I've got those new time hierarchies in my view. I want to look at based years. I'm also going to make use of the absolute months. Because I'm making use of the absolute months, I'm actually going to hide the rolling, or the based months from this time hierarchy of year-based months. I'm just going to use the based year, and I'm going to use some absolute months. See what the view looks like here. So the view, as you can see, now I've got based information for the year, current year through 2 years ago, and this is important for me as the person managing this view, because now if this view is opened up next year, it'll bring in 2018 automatically for me because I have that based year of time involved in the view. My end user may not care that I'm looking at current year or 2 years ago. They probably just want to know I'm looking at 2017 through 2015. So I can leave the view like this, or I can clean it up a little bit and put this absolute information into in this column with year-based. And I will do that by looking at some properties. I could have just double-clicked there. So I'm going to look at the properties for year-based. And there's something called display text. Here I can look at if I have attribute relationships already displayed or available for that level. They'll show here. I want to look at the absolute year. Put that in my view. So now I can see 2017 to 2015. That's what's presented to the end user. So that makes this column a little bit repetitive. Let's hide that. Okay. What's nice about, again, about this view, not only from a maintenance perspective, is I've got 2 time hierarchies involved. So I can split time up a little bit in my view to give me a different type of presentation of data. I can drill down now and see the absolute months from this month's time hierarchy and the months level for each of my based years of time. I can also drag one of those hierarchies or levels to a different spot in the view. And now I've got time across the top of my view in terms of years, and I have it down the rows in terms of absolute time in months. I'm going to drill down or click to go and look at more data. And you'll notice as I'm clicking, it'll tell me where I'm going or where I can go back to in the view. Okay. So what this presentation of data gives me, and I think we're done with View Explorer. We'll hide that. What this gives me is time across the top and bottom, and I'm comparing customers from the U.S. and Canada by year. I'm going to just kind of watch my time here. I'm a little long-winded on this view, but bear with me. We've got just a couple more things to cover here. What I'd like to do is show you how to put a chart into a view, and this is helpful with the trended analysis for your end users. Helps them identify some patterns. So let's insert a chart, and I'm going to do a line chart. Okay. And your series, when you're building a chart, that's going to be what is your chart going to be about, what shows in the legend of the chart. I'm interested in looking at these years of data for my 2 different type of customers. So I'm going to pick columns. I'm going to leave that set to dynamic so that I can bring in all the data from my view, but I'm not going to bring in my totals or all others because that could skew or throw out the scale of my chart. Okay. So my chart comes into display at the bottom. I'm going to actually adjust that, make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to look at, and I'm going to put it at the top of my view. There we go. Okay, so here's my chart showing me a line for each year, each customer, well, the 2 different customers by the 3 different years. I can see some trends. There is a drop-off here, but that's because there's no data yet for the rest of the year for this line. As you update your view, let's say you want to go back to looking at a view where year-based, where the year and the months were both on rows, your chart will update. And if you've got your chart in a state where you think that gives your users enough information about what's happening over time, then you can hide the grid, which you can do in a newer feature called Display Options. Lets you customize some of the look of the view, how much data shows in the view. I'm going to hide the grid, or those rows and columns, and I'm just going to have my chart be what the end users see. Okay, I have 3 more views to show you, probably about 10 more minutes, and we'll still have some time for questions after that. These are a little bit shorter examples here. Let's look at a rolling 24-week view. And remember I showed or indicated earlier that you could accomplish a rolling view with time hierarchies, and here's an example of how to do that. I have a base year on rows, and I have weeks as well on rows. And notice I'm also using that end date attribute relationship. I get this rolling 24 weeks back by using a calculation that filters these weeks. This is kind of a complex calculation, but we do have in our help file, our online help, you can do a search, rolling weeks. You can do a search that will pull up some topics, and let's hope this cooperates. There we go. Topics that will actually show you how to set up this type of view and how to set up the calculation. We have within these topics text that you can copy and paste back into your view. It gives you the exact syntax of that filter that you need to set up to give you those rolling weeks, and you can use this as a model when setting up your views. Okay. I also have a chart that I use to help with that trended analysis. I customized the legend to be in a table format. I customized some of the labels so I can see every single week. Okay. The second from last view we'll look at is a divisional sales view. And this view uses time hierarchies, and it has some time hierarchies both in the rows and in the view filter. This gives me a this year to last year comparison where I show you the percent of change, and it's by division, grocery and food service. I've got absolute months and weeks on the rows, so I can drill down and look at things by weeks level. And to help this in terms of maintenance and keeping this view updating over time as this year and last year change, as time changes, I'm using a based time hierarchy in my view filter. And that gives me last year and the current year is how I've filtered that time hierarchy. Notice I've also used our conditional format feature to create indicators of what might be happening in the view. I've got some shading and icons, and from these results, you'll notice there's red happening usually the first and second week of every month. So that might tell me, I may need to look into this and see what's happening. Why do I have a percent of change that's negative happening typically at those periods of time? And that kind of brings me to the next view, which is, well, how can I give users that extra information without them having to search for it themselves? You can actually link up one view to another view. So this view that we're looking at here looks familiar. We've looked at that year-to-date percent of growth by brand, I believe it was earlier, and now we're looking at by product family. We are using the time ranges again with the current week, year-to-date weeks, current year, and then the current week, year-to-date weeks of the last year. But you'll notice that all these values are clickable. So if I click, let's say I want to look at pairs, I'm looking at my current week. If I click, I am now going to take my user to a view that gives more detailed level or amount of information. So I had a higher level of information here. I have a more detailed level of information in this view. And you notice that was on pairs. So my view that I've taken my users to is filtered by pairs, 4 pairs. And I can see sales amount, return units, and return units to sales units, and some gross margin information, average sales. And you'll notice here that I've linked up a view that uses time ranges with a view that uses time hierarchies. So that's another option for you to mix and match time so that you give your users the type of information that you want to present in the view. So how do I get this link set up between views? I'm going to go into View Explorer. I'm going to look at that measure items property again, and there is something called a drill down view. And this lets you pick what view you want users to go to when they click on a value under one of their measure item columns or rows. gives you a list of all available views, and I wanted weekly because I wanted to give people a breakdown. Oops, I've already closed that. Give people a breakdown at the weekly level. Okay. So I'm just looking over my notes to see if there's anything else I wanted to point out in the demo, but I believe this wraps up the demo portion of the view. I'm going to come back to my PowerPoints and fast forward to the next slide. I showed you one section of online help when we were looking at those rolling weeks and how to set them up. There are other topics in online help about time, including ones that show views that compare the use of time ranges versus time hierarchies. So be sure to check